I think COVID-19 and the lockdown has made, for this group of women, a bad situation even worse. And it's so problematic. The austerity measures that we've been suffering under for the last 10 years, the hike in the pension age, which has left people destitute, and now the COVID-19 and lockdown. It's been really devastating.
When a pandemic hits and you're already on your knees, and that doesn't mean all 50s women, I'm talking about some 50s women, then you have least resilience.
1950s women have been hit particularly hard by the COVID virus for three main reasons. Firstly, their age. The over 60s are in the most vulnerable group.
The fact that the UK government has decided to go against the World Health Organisation's advice that people 60 years and older are most vulnerable and in need of protection, and instead the government's decided only to include people 70 plus, basically leaves a gap of people who are 60 to 70 who aren't being properly protected but are still severely at risk.
It is as clear can be, and you don't need any further clarity. When you hit 60, you're at risk of severe illness and death goes up to 4%, 3 to 4%. That is very high. By comparison, for seasonal influenza, people who get influenza and perish are about 0.1% or small numbers like that. So COVID-19 is different.
Secondly, women are often in frontline jobs, putting themselves at risk. Not just in the National Health Service, not just in care homes, but women are in retail, women are in the supermarkets, and they're also doing jobs that aren't necessarily been furloughed by the government, such as cleaners and hairdressers and those on 0 hours contracts, all of whom are not covered by the government scheme. So these women have to go out on a daily basis and put themselves at risk in order to bring money home for their family.
An additional concern is the fact that a lot of these women who are being exposed don't have access to adequate PPE.
The personal protective equipment guidelines has been changed serially. First, the guidelines were not matched to top level WHO level. Secondly, they were adjusted to meet with shortages of PPE. Guidelines are guidelines, and they need to be, robust and standalone, not metered to work with shortages.
And so you have a situation where these women wouldn't ordinarily be in work, they would be enjoying their hard-earned retirement, and now they are being exposed to a virus that they are particularly vulnerable to because of their age, and the fact that they work in some of the most exposed sectors such as healthcare and retail, and the fact that women make up the majority of people in a lot of these industries and sectors, means that they are being disproportionately exposed to the virus, despite the fact that they are part of that vulnerable group. On top of the fact that they have financial pressures of the impact of the state pension age increase, and also increased caring burdens as parents and grandparents and carers for partners and relatives.
The care home debacle is frontline news most days for putting COVID positive patients into care homes. So many people have died unnecessarily.
Even hospitals are struggling with control of infection in their setting, where they have got trained staff, where they have got better PPE, personal protective equipment, and they still manage to transmit infections. In a nursing home where the setting is different, with poor quality pay, poor quality contracts for the care workers, poor to no proper personal protective equipment, and then you introduce a infectious person into a place like that, it is an absolute disgrace, because this is not rocket science. You're enabling the introduction of an infection into a vulnerable setting, a very vulnerable setting. And then when these people get infected, they die. It's a disgrace. It really is an absolute disgrace. It should never have happened.
And finally, austerity. Now, austerity has been going on for at least 10 years, and there have been years and years discrimination against women with equal pay and everything else. But on top of all of that, the 1950s women had changes to their state pension age that were discriminatory. It is indeed a triple whammy.
In terms of austerity, unpaid carers, voluntary workers, and mostly women shouldered a huge burden, 86% of the cost. And in terms of Brexit, again, it's mostly going to be women, low-paid people, as well as BAME people who will be shouldering the cost. And again, we're seeing the same thing with coronavirus. So it's really important that we stop this pattern in its tracks, particularly not only in terms of the general backlash against women's rights that's going on, but also in terms of specifically in the UK, the government's pattern of putting the economic cost of their decisions in response to crises and problems like this on the shoulders of women, and not really taking their voices into consideration as well.
So back in the day, George Osborne, this was 2008, he said the easiest saving he'd ever made was to make these state pension age changes. And Julia Milford QC said in court they were done to help alleviate massive fiscal pressures following the financial crash of 2008. He said that in court. I mean, how can you say that in court and then say this was based on equality and longevity? It was not. They're total myths.
Even Rishi Sunak, our current Chancellor, has made the point, and if I can just give you a quick quote on this. He has said, "What is clear and is emerging is that the sectors and the people who are most impacted by this lockdown are disproportionately women, and those in the lower paid sectors who are probably financially less resilient." This was the case before we went into lockdown.
Another important thing to consider is the impact on people's mental health. We've seen that the effects of social isolation and other lockdown measures, as well as increased anxiety about future finances and your health, has had a really big impact on people's mental well-being across the board. This is particularly concerning for 1950s women who have suffered from the mental health impact of the state pension age increase and resulting financial hardship for a number of years now.
Some ladies that are increasingly anxious about going out, going back to work when they're in a age group that is more susceptible, so they feel they're being herded into a situation which endangers their physical and their mental well-being.
There's a lot of stress built up, and a lot of this could have been easily better managed. I foresee a lot of anger, a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, and a lot of what I would call post-traumatic stress disorder for many people. And we need to become aware of this and start tackling it now. The sooner you tackle it, the better.
I represent the Back to 60s women in a court battle on this issue, along with a lot of other lawyers. They're part of a team. But it means a great deal to me because 5 years ago, my daughter committed suicide. And as a result, the kind of emotional turmoil that we went through was released in setting up with Yvette and a friend of hers that committed suicide, a support network. Now that relates to Back to 60s women because they have a massive support network for a predicament in which they have been placed. And the COVID impact on that is to accentuate isolation, alienation, which is what they feel about how they've been treated by their government. In other words, they've been essentially dropped off over the edge and forgotten about. Not men, but women who were born in that particular period, just that cohort of women.
Boris said when he was in electioneering mode that he would help. I've actually got the quote here and it's on our website. Boris, I undertake to return to this issue with fresh vigour and new eyes and see what I can do to sort it out, because I'm conscious it's been going on too long. It has been going on too long.
the Chancellor is going about a job creation plan, one glaring omission to his plans is the fact that 50s women are the solution, because were we given our own dues, which belong to us anyway, we could then retire and free up the jobs for the younger people, which many 50s women would do wholeheartedly. And we would also help our adult sons and daughters to look after their families. We would take care of people in the community. We're volunteers. I mean, we are the solution that's staring the government in the face.
Now, the only light at the end of the tunnel that I can see in this is that the longer it goes on, the more information we have been able to find out about just how discriminatory the government has been in the way it has treated 1950s women. And the latest expose by David Henke on the way in which men were completely advantaged in their pension system, while at the same time the government took money away from 3.8 million women.
The Department of Work and Pensions spent the whole time during the appeal saying this is an equality measure, everyone's got to retire at 65 or 66, men have had to work through and everything else. Well, what we discovered is that in 1983 there was a temporary measure, because unemployment was over 3 million then, that Margaret Thatcher and Geoffrey Howe introduced in the budget, which gave 90,000 men who hadn't got a job, saying you don't have to go to the job centre anymore. If you sign on and say you want to protect your national insurance company, we'll pay the lot until you're 65. Now, that was thought at the time to affect 90,000 people. What we hadn't realised was the government kept the scheme on to 2018, just 2 years ago, and 4.6 million men, according to the Department of Work and Pensions estimates, have taken the money. So far from it being men being totally discriminated over the age of 60 because they were still working, the men had their pensions all enhanced, all their contributions paid for up to 5 years.
So what we have had with this advantage of the delay is that we can prove more and more of their lies to actually be lies.
And the DWP are going to have to explain this because it's their own figures. It's not someone outside suggesting it. It's the Department of Work and Pensions figures. And I think that's quite a blow for them. I would have thought judges would take a lot of interest in it.
Now that we've left the EU, that has major consequences for women's rights in particular. We know that women are disproportionately affected through COVID-19. That's all kinds of women, but 1950s women in particular, because of the things that we've already talked about. But human rights protections are very important for women in particular, because we've left the EU now, we've left behind those rights of equalities that were enshrined within EU law, and we're not sure whether we're going to get that. And that cuts across employment law and all sorts of areas of domestic law as well. If those things are going, and it looks very likely that they are, then we need other protections. So if Priti Patel has said, the Home Secretary has said, we're coming out of the European Convention of Human Rights, which would imply that we're coming out of the Human Rights Act, we need United Nations protections. CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, is one such protection for women, and that protects 1950s women. We need it to be incorporated into domestic law in order to have our rights protected in the UK.
The Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, he said the response to COVID should respect the rights and dignity of older people. So he's observing what we're describing, this discrimination which has been exacerbated due to the pandemic. And what's it come to when a man of his eminence has to address the UK in this way?
Well, we know from last year, Professor Alston, who was Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty, who came to the UK, did a report on the difficulties austerity measures have created, especially for 1950s women, but all sorts of people in the UK, that the UN is very interested in what is happening in the situation in the UK at the moment. We've applied through Back to 60 to the CEDAW committee for an inquiry into the UK's position and into the UK's handling of the pensions issue, because then the UK government is not taking account of the dire economic consequences of pension age equalisation, because they're not looking at the underlying issues, the economic issues, the social issues and the health issues of women.
Also, we have, before Parliament broke up and before we had the election, we had over 225 MPs signed up for an early day motion for something about looking at bringing CEDAW into UK law. I know that the election disrupted all of that, but now we still have those MPs on our side, and very grateful to see that Keir Starmer, the new leader of the Labour Party, has also expressed his support for Back to 60. But of course Boris did as well. So you just have to wait and see what they actually will do about expressing their support for women.
The future for 1950s women is going to hinge on a couple of things that are happening very soon. In June, we'll hear whether the UK will have an inquiry against it by the CEDAW committee about the austerity measures, about 1950s women and how they've been so badly mistreated by successive UK governments. In July, we'll hear about the appeal, and that will decide whether there will be any compensation, whether there will be full restitution, or what will happen in the future. I'm really confident that the Court of Appeal will understand that 1950s women have been discriminated against in so many different respects, and I'm sure the legal team will do a fantastic job when they go there in the middle of July.
It's incredibly promising that the judicial review was granted appeal on all grounds. I think that we're moving in a really positive direction, not only in terms of the appeal, but also in terms of illuminating some of the consequences and impacts of different issues such as coronavirus, Brexit, and things like that on these women as a result of the state pension age increase.
When I was in court with the Right Honourable Justice Lang, she accepted every single one of the points that we put forward and dismissed all the government's arguments. Nothing has changed. The government threw a few red herrings in about discrimination against men, about money issues, all irrelevant, nothing to do with the case whatsoever, and actually not actually true. And we have now got even more ammunition to fire at.
I wrote a piece recently on my blog, The Westminster Confidential, actually saying why it was a very good thing that Back to 60 had gone for this appeal. I am really pleased that Back to 60 stuck to its guns, listened to their lawyers who said they had a good case to get permission to do this, and lo and behold they got permission, even better than probably the lawyers thought, because they got permission on every single ground. So basically in July the whole thing is going to be rerun again. And the Department of Work and Pensions, I'm sure, are absolutely livid about this because they thought they had seen the end of it. And that's why I felt it was really important to write a blog in a positive way to say this was a good thing. And also I wanted to shout down any naysayers who were saying, oh, why are Back to 60 raising all this money? They get nowhere, they won't get anything. Well, I sort of felt that had to be called out.
We're very optimistic. The facts speak for themselves. There comes to a point where you can only show people so many facts and actually prove so many things, and eventually they have to see that they might have been a little bit wrong. Even past ministers for pensions, such as Steve Webb, I think he's put down as saying that the government made a bad decision over women's pension age rise. You can put that bad decision is one way of putting it. It has actually been appalling.
It started off, we want our pensions back, but now we're looking to help women in particular across the country so that they're never discriminated again in this way or any other way again. It's time to stop the discrimination right now, and that's our plan.
Any right-minded person shown the facts has said, my goodness, this has to be put right. Justice has to be done. And that's what we feel at the moment. Come on, bring it on. Give us back the money you stole.